So, colleagues, if we could call the meeting to order, and welcome to the February meeting of the Toronto Police Services Board. Mayor Tory will be joining us shortly, but I think we should get going. So I call the meeting to order, and I would like to do the Aboriginal land acknowledgement, and that is that we acknowledge the land that we're meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, and the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now the home of many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. I start by asking if there are any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, and hearing none, we will go forward. Let me say that there's obviously a lot has happened with the Bruce McArthur situation. There's some questions in the community. So I would like to make the board's position clear with the statement, and that is that in light of recent developments in the case of Bruce McArthur and how this relates to the board's ongoing independent civilian review into missing persons investigations being conducted by retired Justice Gloria Epstein. As the public is aware, when the board formally launched its independent review into missing persons investigations, the criminal proceedings involving Bruce McArthur had not yet begun. Given the importance of not in any way impacting the criminal proceedings, the board's terms of reference included specific limits on the scope of the independent review's work. When the criminal proceedings involving Bruce McArthur were nearing their conclusion, the board received a formal request from Justice Epstein to expand the scope of the board's review to include this examination of the circumstances specifically involving Mr. McArthur. Immediately following Mr. McArthur's conviction, the board wrote to the Attorney General, the Honourable Carolyn Mulroney, to ask whether the province was actively considering a public inquiry or any other type of review, and noting that this response was important to the board in determining how to address Justice Epstein's request to revise the terms of reference for her review. The board understands that this is a significant issue of public interest, and community members have raised many questions about missing persons investigations generally, as well as the circumstances surrounding Mr. McArthur's offenses, some of which include the role of the police when conducting investigations into this type of issue. The board believes that it is important that any review be wide-ranging, transparent, open, and comprehensive. And now that the criminal proceedings are at an end, that the specific circumstances surrounding Mr. McArthur's offenses be examined too. We want to not only examine how the board and the service can improve its policies, procedures, training, and culture, but we seek to restore and fortify confidence in our police service and to continue to build bridges with residents from all of our various communities. To date, we have yet to receive a response to our inquiry to the province, but we expect to receive one soon. Once the board has received the response from the Attorney General to the questions it's posed, the board will, at the first available opportunity, consider Justice Epstein's request and will keep the public informed of any such developments. Thank you. Mr. Mayor, you've just joined us. May I ask if there's any conflicts of interest under the Municipal Conflicts of Interest Act? Thank you. I'd also just like to reiterate what I've done on other previous board meetings because of some of the challenges we've had, and that is just to review the rules for deputations. Prior to making a deputation to the board, members of the public should be aware that the rules set out in the board's procedural bylaw governing such deputations. Among other rules, the procedural bylaw contains the following requirements for deputations. Deputations be limited to 5 minutes or the time limited specified by the board. Deputants are to keep their comments focused on the agenda item they're speaking to. Comments about the conduct of a police officer or members of the Toronto Police Service or staff are not permitted, and deputants are not permitted to name individual police officers, members of the Toronto Police Service, or staff in their deputations. Deputants must keep and must take a tone that is respectful and not use offensive words or language in their deputations. While the board welcomes the continued input of deputants, the board also has a process in place to ensure that it functions as an effective governing body. These processes, which are enshrined in the procedural bylaw, have been established to ensure the board meetings are efficient and effective and allow for the contribution of submissions by members of the public in a respectful and an orderly manner. Should a deputation continue in violation of the rules of the procedural bylaw, the chair may rule that such a deputation is concluded and/or take steps to adjourn, recess, or suspend the meeting as necessary. Under the procedural bylaw, a person making a deputation may not disobey a decision of the chair and must immediately withdraw where the chair has ruled a deputation is concluded. After a deputation, board members may ask questions for clarification of the deputant. The board reminds all deputants that the procedural bylaws state that members of the board will not enter into debate with the person making a deputation. The board believes that public consultation and input is critical to effective oversight and will continue to facilitate such input. The board appreciates the public's cooperation with respect to the rules surrounding deputations and decorum at all board meetings. The above provides just a brief overview of some of the rules. For a complete version, you can check the board's website. So thank you very much for that. I now move to item number 1, which is the number 1 on your agenda, which is the confirmation of the minutes of the meeting held on the 24th of January. Actually, there's a deputation on that, so we will hold it for a minute. Let's just go through the agenda since there are no presentations today. Item number 1 we talked about. Item number 2 is the org chart. Is there a motion to approve, or does someone want to hold it? Councillor Ford, seconded. Ms. Mulliner, all in favor? Any contrary? Thank you. Item number 3 is request for funds, the annual committee events of 2019. A motion to approve. Ms. Chandrasekera, seconded. Ms. Mulliner, all in favor? Any contrary? Carried. Thank you. Item number 4 is special constable appointments, the reappointments for February 2019. A motion to approve. Mr. Jeffers and Ms. Chandrasekera, all in favor? Any contrary? Thank you. Item number 5, there's a deputation, so we will hold. Item number 6 is request for funds for the 2019 Special Olympics, the Ontario Invitational Youth Games hosted by the Toronto Police Service. A motion to approve. Ms. Chandrasekera, seconded. Mr. Jeffers, all in favor? Any contrary? Thank you. Item number 7 is the quarterly report, occupational health and safety update. Do you want to hold, Ms. Chandrasekera? Okay. Item number 8 is the annual report 2018 protected disclosure. A motion to receive. Motion to receive. Councillor Ford, seconded. Councillor Nunziata, all in favor? Any contrary? That's carried. Thank you. Item number 9 is the public minutes of the meeting number 64. This is the Joint Health and Safety Committee's meeting, so motion to approve. Hold. Ms. Chandrasekera. Item number 10 is the, okay, 10 and 11. Thank you, Councillor. Item number 12 is the Toronto Police Service scale-out storage, the purchase of Dell EMC, Isilon, and SCLAR decisions, etc. Motion to approve. Motion to approve. Councillor Ford, seconded. Mr. Jeffers, all in favor? Any contrary? Carried. Item number 13, the annual report of the 2018 uniform promotions, and motion to approve. Oh, is there? The deputation is no longer, I'm told. So so we can have a motion to receive, rather it is. Ms. Mulliner, seconded, Mayor Tory, all in favor? Any contrary? It's carried, thank you. Item number 14 is the amendment to uniform and equipment standards during May and June. A motion to approve. Well, do you want to hold it then?
No, I don't want to hold it. I just wanted to say I think this is fantastic. Happy.
Okay. So moved by Ms. Chandrasekera, seconded by Mr. Jeffers. No, Ms. Mulliner. Thank you. All in favor? Any contrary? Thank you. Item number 15 is the independent civilian review of missing persons. This is the accounts for the professional accounts. A motion to approve. Ms. Chandrasekera and Mayor Tory, all in favor? Any contrary? That's carried. Thank you. Item number 16, there's a deputation for. Item number 17, there's a deputation for. Item number 18, there's a deputation for. Item number 19, there is a motion, we want to hold that. Item number 20 is the annual report of the 2018 awards grant by the City of Toronto Police Services Board. A motion to receive. Ms. Mulliner, seconded Mr. Jeffers. All in favor? Any contrary? It's carried. Thank you. Item number 21 is the annual report of the 2018 parking enforcement unit. I'd like to hold that, Mayor Tory. And item number 22 is the annual report, 2018 statistical report, and municipal freedom of information. And and there's a deputation and a motion, so I'm sure we'll hold that. Item number 23 is deputation, so it's hold. Item number 24 is response to the jury recommendations of the coroner's inquest on the death of Quasi Skeen Peters. Motion to receive. Ms. Mulliner, seconded Mayor Tory. All in favor? Any contrary? It's carried. Thank you. Item number 25 is the 2018 secondment list. Motion to receive. Ms. Mulliner, second Ms. Chandrasekera. All in favor? Any contrary? It's carried. And that's it, isn't it? Okay, so we'll go back to the confirmation of the minutes. And there is one deputation by Chris Langenfeld. Chris, you know the rules, 5 minutes. It's now shown on the screen, so there can be no...
So if I can ask before we begin the clock here, is this the 5 minutes that the board said that I would be permitted to speak to the item 1 that was as a result of the advanced time of the meeting from what the board approved for 1:30, and you held the last meeting beginning at 1 o'clock without board approval? Is that
yes,
what this 5 minutes is?
I'll give you, shouldn't take 5 minutes, so I hope you'll take 3.
Well, the issue here is certainly I and many members of the public have take issue with the appointment of Mr. Pringle. I will point out, and I have copies here for the board members of the City of Toronto's public appointments policy governing citizen appointments to city agencies, corporations, and other bodies. So I don't have extra copies for the chief, I don't believe, but there may be one copy for Ms. Nunziata there, Councillor Nunziata. So the maximum appointment is for 2 consecutive 4-year terms. If an individual is appointed for more than half of a original term, that is considered 1 full 4-year term. Mr. Pringle was appointed in 2011. You'll notice at the back there is the board's page of his appointment date, September 23rd, 2011. He's served for 2 terms of council. He's not eligible for reappointment, and he shouldn't, in fact, be on this board. There were appointments up on the city's appointment secretariat for position of public member of the board, but that was since removed. So I guess we're ignoring the city's laws as well as other laws. I certainly take issue with what's been happening in this place here. As we know, there's still the issues of police officers violently attacking people, interfering with their access to this room. I know of no board agreement to set aside half of the room for police officers. I have to, in fact, question why some of them aren't working and why we're paying them to be here. And if they're not on paid duty here, then I certainly don't see any reason that they get to forcibly declare half the building of, or half this room of a public government meeting as theirs. And as we know, there's documentary evidence, and that was filed with the court recently, regarding the violent attacks. I point out that as we know, there were illegal searches going on in this building. The instructions from the board was from you, Mr. Chairman, was to take you to court. I did that. It was declared illegal. So far now, in almost a year or 9 months since that judgment's come out, this board has yet to consider it, notwithstanding the fact that you've still got police officers committing crimes in this building and attacking people, breaking the law. We've seen you've held meetings in public in violation of the Police Services Act 35(3), I think it is, that requires meetings to be open to the public. You have the decision of Justice Copeland that said that meetings put on YouTube do not qualify as open to the public, yet nonetheless this board went off and held secret meetings. In the December meeting whichever meeting it was, November or December, that you went off and held in secret. I was scheduled to speak to a number of items. One of them involved the misappropriation of roughly $1 million. I have to assume that certain board members are getting part of that kickback where for the approval of reviews by psychologists to evaluate new hires, and the existing contract that was for $500,000, the procurement people of the service turned around and awarded an increase of an already granted tender, and for a $490 million or $1,000 award, they tripled the value of that to match what subsequent people quoted in price. That works out to an extra $1 million. I'd like to know who on the board of the service is getting that $1 million in kickbacks, because we all know that in government you don't just pay out an extra $1 million more than what was quoted in contracts. I'd be happy to speak to it. I was scheduled to speak to it, but of course this board broke the law and ignored the Police Services Act and held a secret meeting in order to approve those matters. There's certainly, obviously, many other items that I was scheduled to speak on those secret meetings, both on the canceled October or the November meeting that was canceled at the end, where the board just walked out. Of course, the fact is that at the time the board was dealing with the SIU review of the complaint by Ms. Dion Renee, and the board members never accepted that. They never closed it. They never suspended that discussion. It was, in fact, the open item. It should have been the first item on the agenda as the still existingly open item for the December meeting. Ms. Renee was correct to raise that point before the board tried to continue, and instead that's when you then went off and had secret meetings in violation of the laws. Now, I guess we're going to have to go to the OCPC and ask that you people be removed from office, because those of you that do seem to pay attention and care about what's going on don't seem to be able to stand up to the rest. So that's certainly troubling, and apparently we need some people who can understand the law and enforce it, and maybe we won't have so many of your employees breaking the law as seems to be the case, such as the violent attacks in this building. Again, you've got another copy I've provided you of the 4-page Trespass to Property Act, which is the justification that the service members often use for the violent assaults on people. Nowhere in there does it allow for the use of physical force other than to make an arrest and to bring someone before a court. But of course your officers wouldn't want to take a person before court and say, well, we were trying to prevent them from going in and talking before a government panel on the problems with policing, and we were violently assaulting them in order to cover up our crimes, so we thought we could get away from it and just push them around. And I've had some of your officers pushing me around again, and I've mentioned that this is more than half a dozen times that I've been attacked by people that work for you, and I wonder how long you think I should put up with that. Maybe in the neo-Nazi world and over in Russia, where you people seem to be getting your playbook from, that's the way they do it. But at some point, we tend to stand up and deal with that. So I would suggest that this board should reopen the issue of the appointment of chair of this board. The fact is that Mr. Pringle is not eligible to be sitting on this board. He is simply here until reappointment of the subsequent person for this board. So he certainly shouldn't be appointed for a full year's term as chair of the board that he shouldn't even be sitting on.
Thank you, Mr. Langerfeld. Colleagues, are there any questions of Mr. Langerfeld? If not, thank you very much. Colleagues, that is the confirmation of the minutes of the January 24th meeting. May I have a motion to confirm? Councilor Nunziata? Yep. Mayor Tory? All in favor? Any contrary? Carried. Thank you. I'm just going to read, because I think a number of people missed it, what I went over on the McArthur issue again, just so that we're clear. So I'd like to say that in light of the recent developments in the case of Bruce McArthur and how this relates to the board's ongoing independent civilian review into missing persons investigations being conducted by retired Justice Gloria Epstein. As the public is aware, when the board formally launched its independent review into missing persons investigations, the criminal proceedings involving Bruce McArthur had not yet begun. Given the importance of not in any way impacting the criminal proceedings, the board's terms of reference included specific limits on the scope of the independent review's work. When the criminal proceedings involving Bruce McArthur were nearing their conclusion, the board received a formal request from Justice Epstein to expand the scope of the board's review to include this examination of the circumstances specifically involving Mr. McArthur. Immediately following Mr. McArthur's conviction, the board wrote to the Attorney General, the Honorable Carol Mulroney, to ask whether the province was actively considering a public inquiry or any other type of review, and noting that this response was important to the board in determining how to address Justice Epstein's request to revise the terms of reference for her review. The board understands that this is a significant issue of public interest, and community members have raised a number of questions about missing persons investigations generally, as well as the circumstances surrounding Mr. McArthur's offenses, some of which include the role of the police when conducting investigations of the type at issue here. The board believes that it is important that any review be wide-ranging, transparent, open, and comprehensive. And now that the criminal proceedings are at an end, that the specific circumstances surrounding Mr. McArthur's offenses be examined too. We want not only to examine how the board and the service can improve its policies, procedures, training, and culture, but we seek to restore and fortify confidence in our police service and to continue to build bridges with residents of all our communities. To date, we have yet to receive a response to our inquiry to the province, but we expect one soon. Once the board receives the response from the Attorney General to the question it has posed, the board will, at the first available opportunity, consider Justice Epstein's request and will keep the public informed of any developments. So, thank you. Colleagues, I think that moves us now to item number 5, which is the new job description, facial recognition analysis, forensic identification. And again, there is a deputation, and it from Chris Langenfeld. So, Chris, you know the rules. 5 minutes.
Yes, and I will, I forgot to mention there previously, and I'll take this out of my 5 minutes, that of course your board bylaws, in fact, were brought in February 2017, and in fact that information was only released to the public on a Friday afternoon, And so, in fact, we didn't even have the proper notice that the previous board bylaws required for any item on the agenda, let alone modification of the board bylaws. Had it, in fact, been open to public scrutiny, perhaps you wouldn't have had the charter violation banning placards, as Mr. Moran pointed out at last month's meeting, and this idea that you get to censor and dictate what the people get to say. Now, certainly there are certain rules regarding government meetings, but they are not what you seem to think it is, where you get to be entitled to advance notice of what's going to be said and then control what's going to be said, which is the case here. Now, with regards to this facial recognition, this, of course, goes back to the September 2017 meeting that where the police were illegally barring people and unconstitutionally violating their rights, as opposed to according to the court decision. And at that point, that related to the purchase of the facial recognition software. And I tried to point out at that point, and I was going to speak on it and was on the agenda to speak, that in fact both the Canadian and Ontario privacy commissioners have said that for facial recognition software, for example, the OCP Canada Privacy Commissioner, when technologies are used for surveillance, they are subject to an even higher standard. Their deployment and use should be limited to special circumstances where they are justified as a proportionate response to a pressing and substantial problem. Claims that they are justified should be subject to close scrutiny and stringent tests. What has this board done? Nothing. It approved the chief's request for, I don't even recall what the amount was to purchase this software. Now you're hiring staff in order to start implementing computerized tracking of the civilians going around. We know as part of your ShotSpotter approval, you also approved increased cameras at City Hall in order to track the civilians. Good neo-Nazi technology here. I think the Russians are using that same kind of thing. We know England is, but of course we have different laws here in Canada, and we consider those kind of things. We have privacy commissioners and privacy laws, and they talk about these things, and they issue rulings that say that this kind of technology should be subject to scrutiny. You are the oversight board. You're supposed to be doing that scrutiny. What are you doing? Have you done anything? Have you made any investigations? Have you held any hearings? Have you asked the public anything? Have you put in place any rules governing its use? Have you asked the chief what kind of procedures he's created? Have you publicly disclosed any of that information? No, you've done nothing. You've said, Chief, go ahead, implement some tracking systems that are going to violate our rights, and we'll be stuck with it. And some future government can then throw out the millions of dollars in technology that we're going to go out and purchase and set up. So the fact is that this person should not be hired, and there should first be a review of whether or not we should even be having facial recognition software in place, and whether there should be an expansion of surveillance cameras on the public in public spaces. And after that, then the board should be looking at developing rules to govern in policy, as per the Police Services Act, to govern the use of that, and then we can talk about whether or not we should be purchasing this and whether or not we should hire somebody to do this work. But it is well ahead of that stage at this point, and the board has a responsibility to do those things. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Langenfeld. Any questions of Mr. Langenfeld? If not, thank you. Colleagues, any discussion further on this item or any questions of staff? If not, motion, Ms. Mueller?
It's less a question than an observation. I think the whole issue of facial recognition technology is something that we're all learning to grapple with, and there are obviously advantages and disadvantages, in particular the privacy concerns. And maybe this is a question for the chief, is there some way that one could offer, and I'm not sure it would satisfy everyone, but for example, offer the board or offer members of the public an opportunity to see how it actually works, like essentially a workshop, a town hall, where you want to know how this stuff works, come by Monday, whatever time, and we're going to have a demonstration so that people can better understand it, because I do appreciate that there are all sorts of good reasons that we want to be careful, and more information might help us all understand it better.
I can answer to that. First and foremost, I don't want the connotation of the organization using it for the purpose of surveillance on people. We have worked in concert with all of the technologies that we use before we approach the board when we go beyond pilot to look at all of the lenses that are necessary, whether it be the Privacy Commissioner, Ministry Attorney General's Office, oversights that we do have. We've had a rugged investment in our approach to introducing any type of technology, working on that framework. These technologies are not used to identify, they're used to enhance the criminal investigation that we have ongoing. I don't see a harm in providing an opportunity to have further clarification on what we do, but there needs to be a strong understanding that with any tool that we do use, we understand the importance of privacy and concerns that the community has, and we take all the steps and measures necessary to satisfy that. So that is something that I would definitely be willing to look into further.
Maybe just on that note, I'm not asking that we do it if we don't have a demand. So if in the good judgment of the board staff, there are a number of inquiries that think it would be helpful to have a demonstration, or board members themselves would like a demonstration, then let's take it forward. But I just thought it would be worth mentioning. Thank you. Thank you, Chief.
Ken?
So, Chief, we do have, in consultation, getting a legal opinion regarding the human rights of citizens with respect to surveillance and how that is utilized.
Yeah, anything that winds in the public domain, that lens is always looked at with regards to law enforcement, and there is no change in this technology compared to any other technology. It is a concern that has always been a concern with the community, and we've always safeguarded by ensuring that we put those mechanisms in place by working with other agencies to make sure that we're doing it proper, or else it does not get to withstand the scrutiny within a courtroom setting, which is what this is used for criminal investigations only.
Any other comments? If not, the Chief, I think it would be a good idea, as Ms. Molyneux's suggestion, to you commit to, at a board meeting in the relatively near future, come forward and just run through for board members and the public exactly what's involved and the checks and balances there too. You comfortable with that, Marie? That's really what you're saying. How quickly, Chief, do you think you would like to come back on that?
Whenever there's a request, I always ask for 3 months minimum.
Okay. So, colleagues, are we comfortable with that, with a caveat that we would get the Chief to come forward with a presentation at the board meeting 3 months hence? Marie, that's, so will you move to approve this with that caveat?
Yes.
Seconder? Ms. Chandrasekera, all in favor? Any contrary? Carried. Thank you. That takes us to item number 7, and Uppala, you wish to hold that.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief and Deputy McLean, for this report. Just have a couple of questions. On page 8 of the report, on the incident type bar graph, there appears to be a big jump in the emotional psychological incidents. So 103 this year, which is a big jump from 57 last year and 52 the previous year. And lost work time is at 94. So this is very concerning. Can you comment on this?
If I could ask Deputy McLean.
So I've also asked for our wellness manager, Ivy Nanayakara, to join me in case there's anything I can't respond to, and she's actually mentioned in our Healthy Workplace initiative as one of our new additions to our Human Resources Command team. But specifically for your question, 2018, we've described it as a year like no other. So our members faced a number of challenges this year that we didn't see in the previous years, 2 of which were extreme events, and out of those came an increase in claims outcomes, unintended outcomes as well, that we're seeing reflected in some of these numbers. And so while this is the year end 2018, we still anticipate that we will continue to see them manifest in some of our numbers in this year as well.
Thank you for that. I think that's very helpful to set that context. So I know that the lost work time is 94. So how is work-related stress captured in the document? And how many members do you currently have on stress leave?
So can you clarify when you say work-related stress, that is occupational stress or non-occupational stress? Occupational stress. So can I turn that on?
Sure. So, the work-related stress claims that are reported to the WSIB are reported in that same, under the emotional psychological category. They're not separated, or we don't do a further drill for this report on the specific work triggers. It's all categories there. Stress leave, though, more broadly, that may be work-related or not work-related, is categorized separately, not necessarily on this report. The non-work-related that would be not reportable to the WSIB is being managed under the like the sick time, the short-term disability, long-term disability category. While there may be some overlay in terms of contributing factors, the primary factor being non-occupational falls into that category. So we would need to come back with some further diagnostic indicators of the disability data at large to be able to identify those on so-called stress leave, but they're likely with the like an ICD code of a psychological indicator. We don't have that currently, but we would say that the WSIB reported, so work-related stress falls under that emotional psychological category.
And the board does receive the LTD, STD reporting at some point during the year, right?
I don't believe that we have provided a breakdown of the diagnostic trends related to those claims, but you do definitely see the short-term disability, long-term disability, and what is called the CSLB, the Central Sick Leave Bank, or sort of a form of LTD here, self-insured. But a full dive on that, or kind of a breakdown of what contributes to those, has not been provided to my knowledge yet.
So my next question is related. So on page 7, it outlines the WSIB costs. So it was up 31% in 2017, and then up another 9% in 2018. So about $320,000 for uniform members and almost $70,000 for civilian members. So is this a correlation to my previous question?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Costs?
Yes, and we do see that the presumptive legislation, we have seen since it has been brought in an increase, which when you look at the report on the healthy workplace initiatives, the more that we do creates an environment where people come forward. So while it may look like it is a problem, it could actually be a positive that people are coming forward and they're feeling that their claims are being managed properly.
Absolutely, thank you. That's what I wanted to also state. I think that legislation, the PTSD legislation, is now almost giving people permission to come forward with their issues. So I think this is something certainly we need to monitor over the next few years, but thank you for clarifying that. I'm happy to move and accept.
So this is a motion to receive, moved by Ms. Chandrasekera, seconded Ms. Muller. All in favor? Any contrary? That's carried. Thank you. Ms. Chandrasekera, you also wanted to do hold up number 9, which is the joint health and safety.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to note something very important in this report. On page 2, it says that 4 members of the public were revived by members of the Toronto Police Service using naloxone. So naloxone is a life-saving opioid antidote medication that revives people during an opioid-related emergency. And we know that over the past few years, Toronto police officers have been trained and have started carrying this life-saving tool. This is incredible. It's a great example of how the service is adapting their response to the challenges we're facing in the community. So I really just want to take a moment to acknowledge this and to commend you, Chief, and the officers who were involved in those incidents. So great work.
Thank you very much, and I do appreciate it. The frontline folks try their best to do what they need to do under the circumstances, and a big part is having the right tools for that moment. So as we continue to review, to look at the potential of expansion, that's definitely on our radar, and we'll definitely report back to the board on the advancements and lessons learned going through this very issue. So thank you.
Colleagues, any other questions? If not, a motion to approve the December 13, 2018 minutes of the Central Joint Health and Safety Committee. Ms. Chandrasekera, seconded. Seconded, Councillor Ford. All in favor? Any contrary? It's carried. Thank you. Councillor Nunziata, you want to hold item number 10, which is the painting service vendor record?
Yeah, I just have a question. It's actually related to 10 and 11. What you're doing here on these two contracts, is that part of the shared services with the city?
Yes, in fact.
Connecting and finding efficiencies through shared services?
Exactly.
With their
And so every
contracts?
time we go forward with a procurement,
Yeah.
we ask ourselves if we could do it with other, so we have procurements that we do with the police cooperative group, but we also look to the city. And in this case, the city had two contracts that met our needs, and so we piggyback with them. And what this will do, that when those contracts expire, we will be part of the next RFP
With the city?
as part of shared services.
And that would be part, okay. I just wanted to confirm that that's,
Yep,
yeah.
in both cases.
Okay, great, 'cause I haven't seen that before. Yeah.
So,
So I'll,
okay, Councillor Nunziata has moved approval of both 10 and 11. May I have a seconder? Councillor Ford. All in favor of both approvals? Any contrary? That's carried. Thank you. That takes us to item number 16. And again, there is a deputation for Chris Langenfeld.
Very quick, touching on the same point that I raised. If I'm not mistaken, Chair Pringle, you have been the appointee from this board to that group, and the fact that you're not supposed to be here for another full year, I'd suggest that it should be somebody else appointed to that group. And I hope whoever is appointed does puts much more effort into determining what the powers of the boards are supposed to be and making sure that boards know what their job is and that their job is oversight and that you're supposed to be protecting us from excesses of police. We all know we could turn around and the city, as we know, this board doesn't even know where the money's actually going. It just approved an increase and left it to say, well, the city's going to take care of that when it comes to budget time. So the fact is we don't need this board to look at budget issues. We certainly don't need you to accept reports. We can have the service print those off and put them on their website without you here. So we can save $2 million a year if that's all you people think you're doing. That and operating the slush fund so that you can pay out to hold parties or have the police, you have the city covering the cost of the investigation into the McArthur hearings, and then you turn around and you have the board slush fund covering the cost of the police to hold the Special Olympics. Why isn't the city funding the Special Olympics and the police paying to cover the investigation of police incompetence? You would think that would be the way to do it, but of course that would make clear where the costs are going and the problems costing here. So anyways, I hope when the board considers who they're going to appoint for this role that they'll take into account how long people are supposed to be on this board for the rest of the year. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Langenfeld. Any questions of Mr. Langenfeld? If not, we do need to appoint someone, and I will be, as everybody knows, not putting my name forward for this position. So may we have a nomination for someone from this board to sit on that?
So I'd like to nominate our newest board member, Councillor Michael Ford. I think he'll do a great job.
Michael, are you comfortable with accepting?
I will accept that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So all in favor of the appointment of Councillor Ford to serve on this? Record the, okay. All in favor? I know. All in favor? Any contrary? Thank you. Carried. Michael, thank you very much. Still approve what? So that takes us now to item number 17. Again, there is a deputation. And Again, it's Chris Langenfeld.
Well, hopefully my deputations are getting
sorry?
shorter as we go along here.
First, and then we'll do that. Thank you. Sorry, Chris.
No. Again, it had to do with who the appointments of the board were, but also I just wanted to mention that while these are certainly important issues, mental health and addiction issues and things like that, the fact is that this board's primary role is supposed to be supervision of the police, and I have concerns that this board is regularly getting distracted on a large number of other issues, and so if you're not capable of concentrating on your primary role, then I'd suggest you put less effort into looking at these other things, and you can leave it to police to have forums and hold meetings on mental health issues. I'm sure they already the service already holds many panels and things of that nature going on here. So I hope that this board will refocus its efforts on oversight of the police board before it spends too much time and effort in branching out to do other things that, while worthy, are not necessarily under the purview of this board. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Langenfeld. Any questions of Mr. Langenfeld? If not, thank you. Ms. Chandrasekera, I do want to just introduce this issue because it is a critical issue. And
Thank you, and I do want to address the deputant's comments and say I think the service receives about 80 calls per day revolving around people in crisis, so this definitely is a very important issue for the service. And so with that, Chair Pringle and I are very happy to jointly recommend to you today that the Toronto Police Services Board establish a new mental health and addictions advisory panel. We're pleased to be sharing with you, with the members, the service, and the public, the terms of reference for this panel, as well as the public and open application process for becoming a member of the panel. But before I go into all of the details about the new advisory panel, I do want to take a moment to highlight all of the great activities that the board has undertaken in the area of mental health and addictions over the past 10 years. I think it's important to acknowledge all of the board's work to date, which lays a strong foundation for our work for the future. So if you look in Appendix A of the board report, you'll find a detailed timeline of the mental health and addictions initiatives that the board has undertaken over the past decade. So beginning in September 2009, the board established a mental health subcommittee, and this committee consisted of people with lived experience, many local Toronto community health service providers, hospitals, members of the Toronto Police Service, the board, as well as representatives from the Provincial Ministry of Health. In those early years, I had the pleasure of being part of that subcommittee. This group provided the board and the service with advice on best practices for several key issues, including mobile crisis intervention teams, police hospital protocols, police community partnerships, and mental health police records. The board also looked to the subcommittee for their advice in responding to several key coroner's jury inquest recommendations and important external reports, such as the report by Justice Iacobucci. In addition, beginning in 2012, the Mental Health Subcommittee visited the Toronto Police College to observe and give feedback and advice on the use of force training. This has become an important collaboration for the college, and this community feedback day now takes place on an annual basis. Later that year, with the subcommittee's advice and guidance, the board and the service added, for the very first time, a specific priority on police interactions with people in crisis into the organization's business plan, with detailed goals, objectives, and performance indicators. In 2013, the Mental Health Commission of Canada released the National Standard for Psychological Health and Safety in the Workplace, and the board and the service responded by working together to implement this new standard across the organization to promote mental health and wellness for service members, both uniform and civilian. In 2015, on the advice of the Mental Health Subcommittee and the work of the Ontario Association of Chiefs of Police, the service updated its police records check program so that mental health related information resulting from Mental Health Act apprehensions no longer appears on an individual's police record. In 2016, the board began the Mental Health Excellence Award to recognize members of the service who have demonstrated great leadership in promoting mental health and responding to individuals in crisis. In 2016, again, the board established and sought the advice of an external advisory committee to independently assess and evaluate the work of the service and the board in responding to individuals in crisis and other key issues relating to mental health and addictions across the organization. This external advisory committee recommended that the service, in consultation with the board, develop a comprehensive mental health and addiction strategy. The development of this new organizational mental health and addiction strategy has been underway for the past 2 years in collaboration with the members of the service and the mental health subcommittee to ensure comprehensive community input. I've had the pleasure of being involved in this process, and we anticipate that the new strategy will be released later this year. So I want to take a moment on behalf of the board. I want to thank all the members of the mental health subcommittee who have participated and worked collaboratively with the board and the service over the past 10 years. The board is so grateful to this subcommittee because their advice was significant. It was a significant contribution to the way in which the board and the service has shifted the thinking and approach to responding to people in crisis. I also want to thank and acknowledge the Honorable Michael Wilson, who sadly passed away 2 weeks ago. Mr. Wilson was the chair of the Mental Health Commission of Canada and participated on the board's external advisory committee. He was a passionate advocate for mental health, and the board is very grateful for his support for our work over the years. So now, as we look to the future, Chair Pringle and I are very excited to recommend that the board establish a new mental health and addictions advisory panel. The purpose of this advisory panel will be to review, provide advice, and make recommendations to the board on an annual basis at a minimum related to monitoring and evaluating the implementation of the new organizational mental health and addiction strategy and other matters related to policy involving mental health and addictions issues. Much like the way that the board has established its new anti-racism advisory panel, this new mental health and addictions advisory panel will table their recommendations publicly with the board on a regular basis. This new panel will include members of the community, the board, and the service. The current co-chairs of the mental health subcommittee will become the co-chairs of this new advisory panel, and they include board chair Pringle, Jennifer Chambers, who's the executive director of the Empowerment Council, which is a mental health consumer survivor initiative, and Steve Lurie, who's the executive director of the Canadian Mental Health Association Toronto branch. And I will, of course, continue to support the work of the advisory panel as the second designate member of the board. This advisory panel will include members of the board, members of the service, and members of the community, ensuring that this includes representatives from organizations run by and for people with lived experiences. It's also important that the membership reflect the diversity of Toronto with representatives from major as well as more locally based groups or organizations serving youth and marginalized and racialized groups. An emphasis will also be placed on including individuals with both client-focused and direct lived experience of mental health and addictions issues. This includes lived experience in addictions or substance use, including harm reduction and service delivery, as well as those with expertise in the area of law and human rights, accountability, and data. In particular, this advisory panel will include at least 2 members with direct lived experience of mental health and addictions issues who are connected to an organization representing people with lived experience of mental health and addictions as part of the membership of this panel. The panel will also have a number of representatives from the Toronto Police Service, and we hope to include at a minimum the Deputy Chief, who's charged with overseeing mental health and addictions for the service, the Mental Health Liaison Officer, a representative from the service's Wellness Unit, and representatives from the Further Our Commuting by Uniting Services or Focus Table program. The membership of this panel, through their lived experiences and through their community and organizational affiliations, will assist the board with engaging the larger community, especially the mental health and addictions community. This advisory panel will also engage the broader community through community consultations and through presentations to the panel to obtain additional expertise and advice as needed. So the applications for this panel is open to the public. Pending approval from the board today, we anticipate that the application process will be open shortly and remain open until the end of March. The application review process as well as interviews would take place in April and May, with the proposed list of advisory panel members brought forward to the board hopefully in the June or July meeting. And we anticipate that the first meeting of the new mental health and addictions panel will take place in September 2019. I'm happy to take any questions, or Andy, if you want to add anything
No,
else.
I think that's an outstanding summary. I would just add that an awful lot of work's been done by an awful lot of people, and particularly Steve and Jennifer and you have led the way, so thank you. Colleagues, any question? Ms. Muller?
I think it's great that we have been able to recognize the work that's been done so far and to take it into the next level. And I'm wondering whether on the selection process side, I think it's an appendix, is it C, that talks about how you apply. Is that the process for both members of the service and members of the public? I'm asking because when you, at the very end, you listed a number of folks from the service side that you thought would be involved. There were 3 or 4 already, and those were mostly senior or people who have a specific expertise. But I'm wondering if we have, well, I know we have within the service people who would probably be considered more lay in the area of mental health, but might want to bring a perspective. And how do we get them involved?
So the public application process is for members of the public. In terms of who would participate from the service, I think we'll look to the chief to assign that. Much the way that we assemble the anti-racism advisory panel, we made a few suggestions to the chief, but here's some areas of the organization that we'd like to be to see represented, but really the decision is the chief's decision.
Well, I think then you heard my suggestion that we have a number of people across the organization. Thank you.
Point taken.
Colleagues, any other questions, Ms. Chandrasekera? If not, a motion to, I guess, receive the deputation and approve the establishment of the board's mental health and addictions advisory panel. Yes, so a motion to Ms. Chandrasekera. Seconded, Ms. Mullner. All in favor? Any contrary? Carried, thank you. That takes us down to number 18, where again there's a deputation, and again it's Chris Langenfeld.
Saved me a trip anyways. So just a quick point here, in the middle of the summary here, in the background purpose, it says, the board further requested that the public report include the cost of the grievances, the total cost for the year, and the number of arbitrations where the board, association, or both were successful. And then at the bottom of that page 1 under discussion, the last sentence is, there were 3 arbitration awards issued in 2018. And I'm not sure if that means that the math works out that there were 7 where the board, association, or both were successful, or if that's what the 3 were, that those were the ones where the board was successful when they talk about awards issued. And then I also note that the total cost for this is $91,000 for these grievances, and while I certainly respect the right of officers to be able to file grievances about anything they have a problem with, I question whether it's appropriate for the taxpayers to be paying for this, or whether in fact that $91,000 shouldn't, at least where the grievance isn't upheld, in fact be borne by the association rather than taxpayers. I see no reason for us to be paying for lost grievance matters, so I think the board should consider that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Langenfeld. Any questions of Mr. Langenfeld? Thank you. Is there a breakdown, further breakdown of the chief that thanks, Peter.
I can report to the board that we do provide a further breakdown at the confidential meetings, as these grievances involve confidential HR matters. But I can confirm that in all 3 cases that were reported in this report, the board was successful in those cases.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
Colleagues, any other questions? If not, may I have a motion to, yes, Councilor Nunziata.
Just to understand the chart, on page 2. So the number of grievances as of January 1st, 2018 was 30, and number of new is 33, correct? And then settled was 33, and outstanding as of December is 30. So is that
That's right.
30 from the January 1st, 2018?
It would be a mix.
Is that the same?
It would be a mix
Okay.
of both. We happen to settle the exact same number of grievances this year as we receive new grievances.
Okay.
But it would be a mix of new grievances from 2018 and ones that predate 2018.
Yeah, it's just that the new grievance is 33 and
That's
settled
right.
33.
They just happen to be
Yeah,
the same number for
it was sort
2018.
of like the numbering.
That's right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay, thanks.
Okay, if there are no more questions, discussion, colleagues, a motion to receive the deputation and receive the report. Councillor Nunziata, seconded, Councillor Ford. All in favor? Any contrary? It's carried, thank you. And then item number 19, we wish to hold. There is a motion on 19 as well, but I think, Ms. Chandrasekera, it was you that wished to hold 19?
Thank you. I just wanted to start with a comment before I introduce the motion. Some very important issues were raised during this inquest into the Chapman inquest, into Bradley inquest, Chapman's death, especially key issues involving mental health and addictions and the impact of the ongoing opioid crisis that we're facing as a city. Sadly, we know that the opioid crisis is not just about what's happening in our city, but an issue that we're facing across the province and across the nation. These inquest recommendations provide a great roadmap for how to improve our response to the opioid crisis in Toronto. And there are many recommendations directed to the city, Toronto Public Health, the Toronto Police Service, and directed to us as the Police Services Board. With regards to Inquest Recommendation 26, the jury heard that there is an ad hoc communication between the Toronto Public Health and the Toronto Police Service, and so there is lots of value in strengthening the communication and the relationship between the police service and public health. Certainly the board has had the opportunity to meet directly with Dr. Eileen Davila, the medical officer of health, and that's been a great start to strengthening our relationship. So given this, I wanted to recommend the following motion, which aligns with the inquest recommendations that are directed to the board. That the board direct the chief to report back to the board on the service's progress on implementing these inquest recommendations directed to the service at the May 30th public board meeting, prior to when the first report is due back to the coroner on June 1st. Secondly, that the board refer these inquest recommendations and the chief's May progress report to the board's new mental health and addictions advisory panel that I mentioned in the earlier item, when this panel is established in the spring or summer of 2019, to receive its feedback and advice on further implementation, and that the new mental health and addictions advisory panel report back to the board with its advice by the end of the year, so December 2019. Thirdly, that the board invite Dr. Eileen Davila, Toronto's medical officer of health, to be a member of the board's new mental health and addictions advisory panel, and this is in accordance with recommendation 26-2. And number 4, that the board invite Dr. Davila to present a quarterly report, public report to the board on relevant public health issues, including the opioid overdose crisis, in accordance with recommendation 26-1. And number 5, finally, that the board direct the chief in accordance with recommendation 26-3 and 26-4 to work with Dr. Davila to identify a Toronto Police Service representative to sit on relevant public health committees, report to the board on an annual basis on the representative's participation on these committees, and explore sharing information relevant to the opioid overdose crisis, subject to operational constraints.
Thank you. It's great, excellent. Colleagues, discussion, questions of Ms. Chandrasekera, if not discussion on this. Mayor Tory?
Well, I'll just say, Mr. Chair, that I very much welcome Chandrasekera's motion, because as we deal with this, and it's interesting because yesterday they put out the most recent statistics on how many people were taken by car accidents, and of course the total was less than half of the number that have been taken through drug overdose deaths. And I think this problem, this huge crisis facing our city, continues to be underestimated. And one of the things that I find, and these things all speak to it, is that there's still, things are much better in terms of all the different groups that might have some element of responsibility, either for trying to address the problem itself or some of the consequences of the problem, but not as much as needs to be the case. And so I think these kinds of things, like putting Dr. Davila, who's of course extremely knowledgeable about this and will be a very constructive addition right on this body, I think is going to be helpful, and so on and so forth. So I just welcome it, because I think that, you know, fortunately it's getting more attention now, as well it should, and it's getting more resources. But I think the biggest single step forward we could take is to have a much greater coordination between all the different people who can have some positive impact on it. And this is a step forward in that regard, as is the entire, I mean, the series of recommendations are all, I think, quite well taken, as often they are from coroner's inquests.
Any other questions, discussion, colleagues? If not, a motion to receive the report and to the motion put forward, Ms. Chandrasekera, seconded. Mayor Tory, all in favor? Any contrary? Carried. Thank you. Thank you, Uppala. That's great. That takes us now to item number 21, which, Mayor Tory, you wish to hold, but there's also, I think, a deputation on it, is it? Is it, which is Derek Moran. Derek, 5 minutes, and we now show, as you know from the last meeting, the time on the board.
I just want to say, by me speaking at this meeting, this shall not be deemed to be in any way my consent expressed or implied, in doing so is fraud. God bless Her Majesty the Queen, and long live Her Majesty the Queen. I just want to acknowledge the new board administrator here, Diana, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce her last name, if that's a hard I or a soft I, who emailed me to confirm that I'd been on the list to speak a couple times today, and also included with it a copy of the overview of the board's procedural bylaws. And I just want to simply point out, just in case she's not aware, to take notice that those procedural bylaws apply to a person. There is still no definition for what a person is. She probably doesn't know this, but you expanded 2 years ago the definition section a couple years ago, and ironically didn't put a definition for person in it, ironically, because these bylaws apply to a person. So maybe you'll get around to that eventually. And regardless, anyways, you all know that I said that Ontario Court of Appeal case, ironically in front of an actual Ontario Court of Appeal Justice, Justice Epstein, which says the only person known to our law is the corporation. So if I've ever led the Toronto Police Services Board to believe in any way that I am a person, then that would be a mistake, and that I ask the board to please forgive me. And so I just want to refresh Chief Saunders on Section 15 of the Criminal Code, which can tie in with parking, City of Toronto parking bylaw tickets, which is no person, law applies to everyone equally, so that will also apply to people, shall be convicted of an offense in respect of an act or omission in obedience to the laws for the time being made and enforced by persons in de facto possession of the sovereign power in and over the place where the act or omission occurs. Like Chris Langfeld just pointed out, you're basically the de facto chair right now of the Toronto Police Services Board, and sovereign power, like Premier Ford goes around saying, and the people are the boss, right? Sovereignty's in the people. So I just want to tell a little story about a parking enforcement officer I started up a conversation with at Tim Hortons a while back. Actually, she was rather photogenic, so that was the real reason I sat next to her. But she was pretty cool. We got to talking, and what she said to me was, the City of Toronto, and I just want to make clear, maybe Ken can see this here, actually what it says on Dun & Bradstreet, the corporation of the City of Toronto operating as John Tory. Another one it says on Dun & Bradstreet is Rogers Communications, Inc., also operating as John Tory. I don't know if that's a conflict of interest. But what she told me was the City of Toronto has given us parking enforcement officers the power to actually take back a ticket if it's been determined that they've made a mistake. And I thought, oh my God, because I know you're not going to be happy about this. There's a police officer on Twitter at TPS Traffic DC who commented, another incident against a parking enforcement officer, unacceptable no matter who it involves. Parking enforcement officer assaulted, man arrested. I don't want to see any harm come to my fellow man or woman. And then you're not going to be happy about this, but I'm going to say it anyways. Superintendent Baptiste added, just take the ticket, please fight it in court, not on the street with our officer. And I just want to get across to people that I recently, this is an idea to avoid conflict and taking a swing at a parking enforcement officer. I was in court recently. I don't know if you knew, remember the whole library thing, being arrested for mentioning a librarian's name on Twitter? And I kind of got into it with the Justice of the Peace at the beginning, but the public prosecutor broke it up. And just an idea of something to say in court to diffuse the situation, the public prosecutor pointed out to Justice of the Peace Madigan that, Your Honor, if I may interject, he has already said in his own words that he does not consent to being attorned to the jurisdiction. So at that point, the Justice of Peace was sitting there going, okay, how does the Crown wish to proceed then? Well, the Crown would suggest that we stay the charges, right? So I know it's a pain in the butt getting one of those tickets because, you know, technically a bylaw of the City of Toronto applies to, is a resolution for the purposes of a local board. And there's lots of people out there getting City of Toronto bylaw parking tickets who aren't on any local board of the City of Toronto. So that's how the City of Toronto is misapplying the law that way. Okay, so just go down there and like I did, because it ended up, you know, the public prosecutor was actually, you know, applying the law properly. Just say that respectfully, I do not, let the record show I'm here by special appearance as I object to the jurisdiction, and I do not consent to being attorned. And they played by the rules, that's it.
Thank you, Mr. Moran. And I
Oh, actually,
appreciate it.
Justice Madigan referred to me as sir, and look up sir in the Canadian Oxford Dictionary. It applies to a man.
Okay, sir. I appreciate that. Any questions of Mr. Moran? If not, thank you. No, sir.
Yeah, you meant to say sir.
Sure.
I forgive you, Chair Pringle, even though
Thank
you're not
you.
supposed to be here.
No comment. Thank you, Derek. That's great. John, you wish to hold this? You had an issue?
Well, no, I didn't have an issue as much as I was asked a number of questions by the media about it, and I thought that it would be useful in the public meeting to just ask for a little bit of background from whoever the chief might have here or himself, because the focus they had was on the fact that the number of tickets issued was down. And I just wanted to ask, first of all, there's a number of things referred to in the report that explain that, and I just thought maybe we could get some comments on things like the impact that the Green P application, the mobile payment application has had, the special blitzes that take some time away from regular issuance of parking tickets and take more time to issue tickets, and even fine increases, and just see if there's a general comment on why it's not a gigantic fluctuation, but it's significant enough that you'd notice it, and just wanted to get some comment on the public record about that.
No, absolutely. And Acting Director, but just before that, you're correct, Mayor, in the sense that there are some things that have definitely had an effect on the numbers. First off, the strategic deployment, and we have switched to community safety rather than numbers, and so putting resources in places where A, we can save lives, and B, enhance the traffic flow is something that has been extremely critical to us, and that has definitely caused reductions. When we look at the opportunities and means in which people can pay fines or pay for parking, has made it easier now for people to pay those fines, and so as such, there is a reduction there. The 10-minute grace took a huge turn of events when we when we implemented that particular piece. But when you factor all of those things, it definitely does have a fairly significant dent in the numbers that were compared to the days of old, without all of these items that we were dealing with when it came to issuing tags. But if you have anything else to add to that, that would be great.
Definitely, as the chief has indicated, using the mobile pay app is very easy for the users to have increased compliance in the field. Whereas before, you have to rush to the meter to deposit the coins or make a payment like in person. Right now, you have the facility, just you can enhance your payments by 15 minutes, half an hour, like whatever time you choose. And by the time you are expiring your time, you get the notification. So it's very easy to enhance compliance, but in turn, it brings our tag numbers down. And at the same time, when we're doing those rush hour enforcement blitz, we deploy like more resources to focus on rush hour roads. So that's takes away some of the staff from the surrounding areas. So that definitely has some impact on the enforcement numbers. But the good part is it increases the compliance on the roads and enhance the free flow of traffic, which is one of the main initiatives of the city.
Thank you.
Any other questions, colleagues? Ms. Francis Nziara?
Yes, just a question on Appendix A, if you can explain, special events and hours spent on special events. Can you explain? These are tickets that you've issued at special events?
No, these are special events in the city, like Carabana. So these are the events which are organized in the city, like throughout the year, like a Carabana or any special events. And the hours spent are like the number of staff hours assigned by the POs who are, like all the hours spent on those events.
Well, again, it speaks to the enforcement piece. So, I mean, included in enforcement is the distribution of the tags, but relocating vehicles or towing vehicles depending on where they're parked. So, when we talk about the Santa Claus Parade, the Pride Parade, when we talk about the Caribbean Carnival, all of these factors, there is a strong enforcement component at the start for the clearance of. Okay.
So when there's a special event, to ensure that if the road is closed, then you tag the cars that are parked illegally. Is that what you do?
If required, yes.
Yeah,
If we have to
yeah.
relocate vehicles, yeah.
Oh, okay, sorry. Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much, colleagues. If there's no further questions, I think we need a motion to receive the deputation and receive the report. Auditorium, second by Councillor Nunziata. All in favor? Any contrary? Carried. Thank you. So that brings us to item number 22, where there are two deputations, and then there's a motion as well. And the first deputation is Brenda Ross. Brenda, thank you for coming. You know that the time is now on the screen for your benefit. And you've got 5 minutes. Thank you.
The topic of freedom of information. I'd like to bring the following to your attention. The police service goes to great ends to make sure that the public does not get the information they request, with stories about delays, rules, we don't have enough staff, we don't know what you're asking for, we don't understand what you're saying. Question. We always have a huge backlog. I have never gotten any of my requests that I've ever asked for. 2 of them are in appeal. 2 of them concern the chief of police himself. Question. Has anyone ever considered that the backlog be handled by people that have retired from the service, that already know the job? So, for example, they've retired, we're not going to upset their pension, but perhaps they could be brought back to handle the backlog until we somehow try to catch up. We're so far behind. We never succeed. This is a losing proposition that never seems to have an end. We talk about it every year, and every year it gets worse. So could we please consider retired individuals that already know the job? They don't need to be trained. They'd like a little extra cash perhaps, or whatever. Could we consider possibly some way that we could bring them back to handle Only the backlog, not the new things, just the backlog. Just an idea that I want to throw out there. I have currently got 2 requests out for freedom of information that concern the chief of police. The chief is refusing to say when he was employed at 13 Division and what his status was there. Now, my problem with that, ladies and gentlemen, is that I have only complained about 13 Division. I've complained time and time again, and it's important to know when my chief was there and what he was doing there, because he's the one who decided there was going to be no action regarding my family and what has happened to us.
I just remind you, Brenda, to keep it to the complaint and not about individuals.
I don't know how one cannot mention the individual in question when he's the judge of the case. So we're saying the judge of the case was actually there, but he's the judge of the case. How can the judge of a case have been involved in the case? I've never heard of that in my life. So I do want to bring that to your attention, and it's now under appeal because he's refusing to respond to that question. He has given a public speech about his time at various divisions. I was at the speech. He mentioned that he was at 13 Division, but not when or what he was doing there. And I find this beyond problematic. I find it criminal that he's not made to tell us the answer to these questions. Now, under freedom of information, of which I've applied I don't know how many times, I keep on getting no response. So we're over at the Privacy Commissioner with the same question that never gets a response. He's also refusing to tell me where a file is being kept that used to be in the chief's office. His staff are saying they don't know what happened to it. I find it difficult to believe that the police staff who are taking care of the chief do not know what happened to the documents that were in his office. And for proof, I've provided a senior officer's name telling us about this file, which I've turned over to the Privacy Commissioner. I find it strange that no matter what you ask for, there's always a problem getting it from the police service. And I wish you would take into account my request. This business of, oh, we have all these delays and we can't answer because we don't have enough staff. I'm going to repeat this. I would like discussed right now, after I sit down, the question of retaining retired individuals that can hit the ground running, that can show up here and immediately deal with this problem. 1, why can't you get your job done? What's the problem? And 2, why is the chief being allowed to behave in this way when he possibly is involved in criminal acts? Thank you.
Yes,
Comments that are being made are inappropriate.
they are.
Stick to the topic, and to target and insult, it's
Please,
not
madam.
unacceptable.
So-
Excuse me, this is Frances Nunziata, the woman who used to be
Thank
my
you.
mayor
Thank you, Ms.
that
Ross.
refused to help our family.
So,
She should
Ms.
not
Ross.
be on this board. Her racism is palpable. Thank you.
Questions, colleagues? Okay. Chief Saunders, just let me ask a question then about cleaning up the backlog and how we use people to do that, or
So
Mr. Vincent.
So through you, Mr. Chair, we're actively looking at that. In fact, last year, we wanted to hire a dedicated team of 6 people who could be retired individuals as well. Unfortunately, we didn't get any take-up on that. So what we're doing this year is actually setting up 4 career development opportunities of people that were currently work for the service, who will then be doing the cases and be trained to do some of the cases that we get on an ongoing basis. And then 4 experienced disclosure analysts would actually deal with the backlog. If that works, we're hoping to have this backlog eliminated by the end of the year.
Is that this year? 2019?
That's correct. That's the plan.
Questions, colleagues? If not, Brenda, thank you very much. And thank you. And yes. Oh. Sorry, there is one more deputation, and that is Derek Moran. Thank you. I'm sure you can just sit there if you don't participate in the discussion. Derek, you have 5 minutes. We haven't started yet.
I'm going to bring it back next month, but I have read here before the Supreme Court case law that says part of freedom of expression is the right to criticize the rich, the powerful, and those who are in government. I'm sure Chief Saunders does not like what she just had to say, except that, again, is part of freedom of expression. If Councillor Nunziata doesn't like it, then she should leave. She should resign from the board.
Yes,
Derek, would you
resign from
please
the board.
stick to the...
We need to be you off the board.
We need people on this board that will respect the oath they took to uphold the Constitution. If you do not like it, get your stuff and get out. You are not doing us a favor by being on this board. Okay, so in this report it says, background purpose, the purposes of the Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act R21 provide a right of access to information under the control of institutions. Now, I just wanted to point out that towards the end, one thing that Justice Kavanaugh sat up promptly to take notes about was when Dion Renee on Tuesday, in Dion Renee versus the Toronto Police Services Board, mentioned Supreme Court case law on the public's right to be informed and the search for truth in relation to Section 2B, freedom of expression. So, because Chris Langenfeld here is constantly busting my chops about how I never provide any written material regarding the case law I cite, that's why I sent it in this time. I'm going to spend the rest of my time citing where the public's right to information is mentioned. So we'll start off with the Dictionary of Canadian Laws right there. There's a definition for public's right to know, which is the right of members of the public to be informed about the operations of government and public officials. Aubrey versus Additions, vice versa. 1998, the Supreme Court of Canada said, in the context of freedom of expression, which is at the heart of the public's interest in being informed, freedom of expression and the public's right to information will prevail where the expression at issue concerns information that is socially useful. This notion seems to have been borrowed from American law, which draws a distinction between useful information in the sense of the public's right to be informed and information whose sole purpose is commercial. Gilles Inaron, Communication Marketing versus Chambre des Notaires du Québec, 2004, Supreme Court of Canada. Public's right to information is embodied in freedom of expression and freedom of the press. Freedom of expression is not, however, a creature of the Charter. It is one of the fundamental concepts that has formed the basis for the historical development of the political, social, and educational institutions of Western society. Representative democracy, as we know it today, right? City of Toronto's taken Premier Ford to court over this in the summer. As we know it today, which is in great part the product of free expression and discussion of varying ideas, depends upon its maintenance and protection, which I am trying to do. Month in, month out, we're gonna run this play until we finally get it right. Adventus Pasteur versus Canada Attorney General 2004, the federal court said, the public's right to know how government spends public funds as a means of holding government accountable for its expenditures is a fundamental notion of responsible government. I could have swore I heard the City of Toronto lawyers bring that up in the court case regarding Premier Ford and the council cut last summer. That is known to all. Endine versus British Columbia 2016, Supreme Court of Canada said, it must be understood as an ensemble of practices and principles that are called upon in various contexts to serve our society's democratic ideals, one of which being the public's right to know the law and to understand its application. This is one of my favorites. Central Auto Parts versus Barclay 2016, the Court of Appeal of Ontario for Ontario said, as in Webb versus Waterloo Regional Police Services Board, standard police media policies and practices and the public's right to know, again, have to be considered. Ontario Public Safety and Security versus Criminal Lawyers Association, 2010, Supreme Court of Canada said, As Louis D. Brandeis famously wrote in his 1913 article in Harper's Weekly entitled What Publicity Can Do, sunlight is said to be the best of disinfectants. Open government requires that the citizenry be granted access to government records when it is necessary to meaningful public debate on the conduct of government institutions. Ross versus New Brunswick School District, 1996, Supreme Court of Canada said, the wide ambit of Section 2B is underscored by the following passage from McLaughlin J's reasons in that case. The purpose of the guarantee is to permit free expression to the end of promoting truth,
Thank you, Derek.
political or social participation, and self-fulfillment. Promoting truth, and the next one I was going to say was regarding the search for truth, which is stuff that does not happen here, that's for sure.
Thank you very much, Derek. Colleagues, any questions for Derek? Okay, thank you. Any discussion, colleagues, on this? Is there a motion? Ms. Muller?
So I say this as a retired public servant. Access to information and freedom of information requests are one of the bane of every public servant's existence. They're complicated, they take time, and I think many decades ago when the legislation was invented, it was long before we saw how easy it was going to be to create lots of information quickly. So knowing that, I do have a fair bit of empathy for our colleagues at the police service, having been both the subject of and the manager of access to information requests. I'm wondering whether, given the challenges that are associated with the increase, and I appreciate very much that you're aiming to achieve a backlog elimination by the end of this year, whether a motion encouraging that makes some sense. So I've asked the board staff, and I think it's up on the board, that the board encourage the chief to continue all ongoing efforts to reduce the current backlog, that the chief engage with other entities, not just police services, who regularly have a high volume of access to information requests, so that they can identify access to information, best practices, and mechanisms to balance the legislative requirements with operational limitations. And then there's another, thank you, section, that the chief engage with other entities and report back, as we discussed earlier, by the end of this year, December 19, on best practices that the services can adopt and implement to reduce access to information backlogs and limit future backlogs, and also identify what issues the board may wish to explore further, engage further with the Information and Privacy Commissioner and other provincial government officials in order to draw attention to those challenges associated with this increased access to information requests and the complexity of those requests.
That's great. Thank you, Ms. Muller. Any questions, any discussion, colleagues? If not, may I have a motion then to receive the deputations and to approve the motion and receive the report? Ms. Chandrasekera, Ms. Muller, all in favor? Any contrary? Thank you. Takes us to, I think, item number 23. And that is one deputation. This is the Healthy Workplace Initiatives. And Brenda, that is you. Thank you. 5 minutes.
Everybody here's heard this before, but I'm going to say it again. The only person who hasn't heard it is Michael Ford. I need Michael Ford to listen to what I'm saying, and I need him to think about what I'm saying, because I'm extremely disturbed by it, and I'm not the only one. Chaplaincy services, page 11. I am disturbed that 1 year ago, I spoke about a certain chaplain who was the chaplain for 13 Division, handed out to the board documentation about this specific person, his illegal acts, and the fact that he was a chaplain. How could a person guilty of illegal acts never be before the tribunal and be a chaplain? He's now, I'm told, additionally, coaching a basketball team for youth. I want to know why Deputy Chief Barbara, whose staff promised that I was going to be contacted about this 1 year ago, has never contacted me about any of it. The chief is completely unconcerned about it, and no board member seems to have read what I handed out. which was extremely disturbing. 2 police officers being involved in illegal activity and interfering in a legal proceeding. And one of them is now a chaplain and has been a chaplain for some time. Does nobody screen the chaplains who are in the chaplain service? Does anybody who wants to be a volunteer chaplain just come forward and hey, okay, you're the chaplain. You don't even know what they're saying to these young people or what's going on. Absolutely no oversight in what's happening. None at all. Now, we're not allowed to say the person's name, but if anyone looks up the record, they'll find his name. Last but not least, I wish the board to know the community is completely losing faith in the chief and in this board. And so I accuse this board of absolutely no concern about the public, no concern about their duty as oversight of the police. Basically, you just couldn't care less what we say. You're guilty of willful blindness and extraordinary prejudice. There has been historical prosecutions of the police in matters that they've been involved in years ago, and one is currently before the tribunal. A policeman that did something 10 years ago before the tribunal as of a few days ago. So the story that was given to me, and I accuse you all of lying, the story that was given to me that there can be no prosecution of a person longer than a few years ago was not true and is borne out in this newspaper article of a few days ago, giving a story about a policeman who's been tried by the tribunal for acts that are 10 years old. I find it shameful that I've not been told the truth, and if it wasn't for my research and looking into this, I would be believing what was said to me. And I wonder how many other people are in this position. I accuse the board of extreme prejudice. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions of Ms. Ross? Okay, thank you very much. Colleagues, any discussion on the item number 23, the Healthy Workplace Initiatives? Ms. Chandrasekera?
Thank you, Chair. I have a lot to say on this, but first I really want to say to the Chief and to Deputy McLean, I thought this was a really excellent report. I really appreciated all of the information that was in this report. I really also want to highlight a lot of the positive things that the service is doing that I was very happy to read about. So here goes. I'll take a few minutes. The ongoing ISTP modules on wellness, awesome. That's so great to see. The mindfulness program, I was so impressed. There's so much evidence behind this, so I'm really happy to see that it's being used at TPS. That's really great. Road to Mental Readiness, you've heard me mention it before. I fully support that program. Again, a very evidence-based program. And I was really happy to note in your report that all of the service members will be trained in the next 2 years. That's really great. Considering the scope and size of this organization, that's not an easy thing to do, and I'm very happy to see that. It's also really great to see that there are several units in the service that are participating in the psychological wellness program. And I think it's really great that it's being offered to specific units because that shows that you're actually being really proactive about providing this support. So I really appreciate that. I think that's really great work. I also appreciated seeing wellness visits for members returning from overseas missions. That's such a great idea. I know you don't have too many of those members, but really important that when they come back that they have the support. I was also really happy to read about the early career wellness program. This is so great because it really does lay the foundation early for support and wellness in an individual's career, and also sets the tone that this is how we do things, right? And this is the way in which the service supports individuals. Also really great to see that families and members and their families are engaged with the Employee and Family Assistance Program. I was also really happy to see the critical incident debriefings with the psychologists. I think this piece is so important because it addresses trauma, it addresses PTSD, especially when we have earth-shattering events that happen in this city, especially in the last year. So I was very pleased to see that. This is a lot of great work, and I bet there's more going on that you couldn't fit into the pages of of this report. So my question to you is, how do you measure the effectiveness of all of these programs? They all sound amazing, but how do you really know that they're effective? And is there also a member satisfaction component in the way that you measure the effectiveness of the program?
First of all, thank you for taking the time to go through that inventory. It's really impactful that you've noticed, so thank you. So in terms of your question about measurement, so there is some measurement going on. Right now, I'll say that it's ad hoc and it's not as extensive as I would like. So one of the goals that I have for Human Resources Command is actually bring more analytics to some of the things that we do, so that we are able to tell the outcomes of some of these stories. I can tell you that in terms of some measurement, our psychological wellness program that you mentioned for specific units does have a measurement, had a measurement when it was a pilot, and what came out of that is we need more of it. The early wellness career visits was a pilot, and what came out of that was that it was very well received, and we want to expand that. And then last year in 2018, we did actually do a satisfaction survey of people who did come and see our psychologists. And so those are areas where the board is seeing that we are building capacity, as recently even as this morning, in terms of how we are trying to attract some talent so that we can actually look at some of the indicators that we have, create some programs, and then find what are the key performance indicators that we need, some of which will have a time lag, but what are some of the things that we can actually start doing so that we can tell our story a little bit better.
And I'll just add to that. A lot of things are learning as you operationally go, and to hold back and look at creating the perfect package and not have the products out there would have been a bigger detriment. So keeping our eyes and ears open and then figuring out those mechanisms, because you're looking for effectiveness, and we are too, because it gives us an opportunity to figure out if we need to resource more, promote more, and how to move our resources in the right places for that necessary help. I know personally I've spoken with a couple of people who've gone through some traumatic issues in the days of old, and they've really given some positive feedback to what they're seeing. But it speaks to another message. I think the fact that who we hire and through the HR command with the specialized people that we hire, when people are looking, that's a really good sign, because before people didn't think that there's anything out there, and so now that we know that people are looking, I think it's a right cultural change with the direction we're going to, and it deals with wellness of our people.
Thank you so much. I think this is really excellent work, and as we focus broadly on mental health and addictions, it's not just about our interactions with the public, but also how we support every single member that does this hard work internally. So thank you for that.
Colleagues, any further discussion on this item? If not, a motion to receive the deputation and receive the item. Ms. Chandrasekera, seconded. Ms. Molnar, all in favor? Any contrary? Is there any other business to be brought before the board? If not, a motion to adjourn. Ms. Molnar, thank you. Mr. Jeffers, thank you. All in favor? Thank you very much, everybody.
part of the Ontario tribunals.
Oh, I was wondering if there was.
Everything bad you heard about? So I didn't think that all those punch jokes, I didn't think those actually. Okay. All right, Does this say reserve? Thank you very much. Great job.
Congratulations.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, maybe that.
Very large one, no umbrella.
Sweet, friendly, fruity thing.
Yeah, something virgin.
Yeah.
Take care.
The only thing that it doesn't say is who said it. I know. So when we were, last year we were recruiting for the education. I'm like, yeah, bringing the kids. During board meetings, bring them, breastfeeding like Joanne's or Ryan's office, and then I would come out to them. But, it's what you gotta do. Look at him, he's so cute. Look at the size of his hands. He weighs 25 pounds, he's 13 months. He's gigantic. My back hurts.
And somebody else
And this is his,
he lost his mind and he tasered somebody.
so this is his caregiver. control her authority, everything's left.